So most of you don't know this about me, but you might. But Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday of the year. As a Christian, yes, it's Easter. I get it. I know where I'm supposed to be, right? But of the holidays for me to celebrate, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. And it's because of the food. Like, people make incredible food. And there was a few years, and I've always fought for Thanksgiving because people seem to kind of skip over Thanksgiving. It always goes from, Halloween right into Christmas, or, 4th of July right into Christmas for some of you. I know how you work. And I've always kind of fought for Thanksgiving, and people have made fun of me for it. But a few years ago, I can't remember how many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I started giving these tips on Facebook on how to better celebrate Thanksgiving, just so people didn't mess it up. And I'm going to give you all a few of those tips every week this month, because I want y'all to hear some of these things. You got to be aware of them and just be thinking about Thanksgiving. We're going to do a series this entire month on Thanksgiving, how to be thankful, and just look at that as a way. But I just want to give y'all some tips on Thanksgiving. I'm not going to give you all of them because there's about 26 of them, but I want to give you 3 this morning. First one is this: just because you're hosting Thanksgiving doesn't mean you should cook Thanksgiving. Grandma, or whoever grandma trained, should be in charge of cooking this meal. If every year you're told to bring a salad or prepackaged rolls, then don't make things awkward by trying to do something new. Stay in your lane. That's the first tip. Tip number 2 this morning is this: the adult table is a coveted spot, and you should not make room around it. Adult table spots open only in the absence of those who were there before, so I don't care if you're 22 and a college graduate. Go eat your mashed potatoes at the card table with your cousins and wait for your time. And the third one this morning, and then we'll get into the message, is this: Gen Z and millennials. If you are fortunate enough to have grandparents and great-grandparents at the dinner table, do not, I repeat, do not be alarmed when they put cornbread in a bowl and cover it with milk. This is natural for them, and you should probably get off your phone long enough to let them tell you some other creative things about their generation. So. Like I said, I think a lot of people skip Thanksgiving. They go straight from Halloween right into to Christmas, and Thanksgiving gets kind of put aside. And I think a lot of times, spiritually, we have the same tendency. We have a tendency to go from one blessing to another blessing without ever recognizing God whatsoever. We have a tendency to kind of see, like, this is a blessing in my life, and now I just anticipate the next blessing without ever stopping to recognize where that blessing came from. And one of the things that I want us to do this morning is just talk about what gratefulness looks like, how we can stop long enough to be grateful. And I think in order for us to do that, one of the things that we have to do first is that we have to recognize God. Now, Paul wrote in Romans, and when Paul wrote this letter in Rome to Rome, the Roman church, he's writing this letter as a letter of transfer. It's kind of like a transfer letter from one church to another. Paul was going from Antioch, and he was wanting to head to Spain, and Rome was the church that was going to allow him to get there. And so he writes this letter to Rome, and he starts off with introducing himself as to who he is. And then Romans is one of the great theological books in the Bible. And so if you've ever had the opportunity to study it, I hope that you have. If not, I pray that you do. But he starts off in the first chapter of Romans, after his introduction, and he talks about God's wrath against mankind. And he says it in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. He says it like this. He says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." And the thing that Paul insists here in this passage is that we cannot plead ignorance when it comes to God. There are people out there who like to think, well, there's no proof of God. There's no way that we can know that there really is a God. But Paul's statement here is that you cannot plead ignorance when it comes to God. He says that it's always been possible to see what he is like from the world that he created. And so I want you to consider this for just a moment. The universe that we live in is so vast that its actual size is beyond our comprehension. We have no ability to actually comprehend how big the universe is. The Milky Way galaxy that we live in stretches approximately 100,000 light years across and contains over 200 billion stars. I mean, if you just start to kind of take that in just a minute, that's 200 billion. That's a bunch. Our local solar system is 7 billion miles in diameter and contains the sun, planets, moons, comets, and it's just a tiny part of the Milky Way galaxy. And then scientists estimate that there are over 170 billion galaxies in the observable universe, that each one contains billions and sometimes trillions of stars. That's huge. That's big. I hear billions and trillions and miles and all these different things. I can't comprehend what I just read to you. Like that's a large capacity of stuff, and we can't even begin to understand what all's in all of those areas. And yet the psalmist tells us in Psalms 147:4, he says he counts the number of the stars and he calls them by name. You step back and you think about the millions and trillions of stars and billions of stars, and he calls them by name. And the psalmist also says in 97:9 that the heavens declare his righteousness, and all the peoples see his glory. And you may think to yourself that a God that can create all of that certainly cannot have time to recognize me, right? So there are some people who say, look, there is no God, there's no proof of God, you can't see him at all. And then there's others who say, well, I think there's a God, but this God is too big for me. One's an atheist, one's an agnostic. One thinks that God, yes, there's a God, but he doesn't have time to recognize me. He's too busy making sure that his creation is working properly. He's too busy making sure that the planet stays in its orbit. He's too busy making sure that the rain falls where it needs to fall so that all the people he created will have enough food to be able to survive. And yet the Bible tells us in Psalms 139, he says, you have searched me, O Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all of my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. And so the same God that we can recognize just by looking at the stars and looking at the creation around us is the same God that knows us intimately and cares about us intimately. He allows blessings to come into our life, and we get to celebrate those things, and those blessings overwhelm us with happiness sometimes. And he's also the same God that allows devastation to come into our lives, that causes us to have to lean in on his strength because we don't have the strength to make it through whatever he's allowed on our own. And he allows those hardships to come in so that we trust him more. And so Paul's argument in the first part of Romans here is completely valid. What he's saying is, he says, if we can look at the world and see its majesty, its complexity, and its laws that govern our existence, watch this, that we did not make and we cannot control and we cannot live without. If we can look at a world like that and from a world like that, you know not only that there is a God, but you can know what God is like. He is big enough to create everything that we see, and he is detailed and intimate enough to care about you and the words that you say and the things that you think. He's the God who cares about the biggest things and the smallest details. He is the God who knows you better than you know yourself. He is the God who desires for you to spend eternity with him. He's the God who had a plan in place for you long before you ever existed. And he is the God who we must recognize as the giver of all good things, including the breath that you just took. And so the question then becomes, if we do indeed recognize him, do we glorify him? Because the people that Paul's writing about here, they didn't. Here's what Paul says in this next verse. He says in Romans 1:21, he says, for although they knew God, They knew that they could look around and see what God was like. They knew that they could look at creation and know that there's a God. They neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And Paul says that they were foolish, and here's why. Because they made their ideas their standard of living. It was all about them. They gave more credence to their opinions than to God's truth. They saw themselves as the master of all things, and they lived in this self-centered world instead of a God-centered world. And what happens in a self-centered world is everything turns inward. Your worship turns inward. Your thoughts turn inward. Your desires turn inward. But when we live in a God-centered world, everything turns outward. Everything turns toward him. Everything looks to him. And when we live in a self-centered world, we exchange the glory of God for our own glory. But when we live in a God-centered world, we don't exchange that at all. We give God the glory that he rightly deserves. And so we have to be careful that our worship doesn't turn inward. And you might think to yourself, you know what, JJ, I don't have a problem with that. That's not me. I never have really looked at it. I've always believed in God. I grew up in church. I've done all those things. And I would say that we need to be careful. And the reason we need to be careful is because, and I told students this all the time, and parents when I was a youth pastor, your kid is only one decision away from really destroying their life. It only takes one decision. Everybody can be going on and just everything seems to be going really well, and one decision pops up, and that one decision can put you in a tailspin for the rest of your life if you're not careful. And the same thing is true for us. So we have to be very careful. And here's why I think I need to be careful, just me personally. I have to be careful to balance the truth of God with the gifts of God. And here's what I mean by that. I believe that God is sovereign. I believe that he controls all things. I believe he allows and allows things to take place in my life all the time. I believe that he has a purpose for my life and that he's working constantly on my behalf to see that purpose fulfilled. And I think not only do I believe that about me, but I believe that about you too, right? That's not just a me thing. Here's what I also believe. I also believe that God has given me the ability to think clearly most of the time, right? At 52 years of age, I have gained some wisdom. I know that there's some wisdom I have yet to gain, but I know that he's surrounded me with people who love him and love me, and they will help me get wisdom where I don't have it. And I believe that he has given me information with which to make good decisions. Now, I think some of y'all would agree with all of those things. He's given you that same ability as well. Here's where I have to be careful. I have to be careful because I will make decisions based on my wisdom. And I will make decisions based on my thinking, and I'll make decisions based on the information that's presented to me without ever stopping to seek God at all. And it's not that I don't want God's opinion. Here's what I think. And I thought this a lot more as a 30-year-old than I do as a 52, almost 53-year-old. But I thought, God's given me the wisdom. He's given me the ability to make the decisions. Now he's given me the information, so I need to make I need to make a call. And I'm not afraid to make a decision. Anybody that knows me knows that if I'm given enough information, I'll go ahead and do something. There will be people who come into my office and say, JJ, I need to deal with this matter. And I'll pick up a phone before they walk out of my office and I'll start doing something with it. I'm not afraid to make a decision. The problem is that sometimes I'll make a decision without ever stopping to consider God in the situation. Because what I think is he's given me the ability to think clearly. He's given me the talents. He's given me the information. Let's just make the decision. And I'll make the decision. And it's the wrong decision because I never bothered to ask him and I never included him in the decision at all. And I just assumed that because it felt right to me, that it was all right with God. And so we have to be very careful that we don't get outside of ourselves and become so focused in on the fact that of the gifts that he's given us that we just get beyond asking him to be a part of the decision-making process. We need to not be so comfortable within our jobs and our careers that we think that he no longer has a say in our jobs and our careers. We need to not be so comfortable within our families and what's going on within our families that we never stop to say, God, thank you for my family. Can I pray for my family? Can I do these types of things? We've got to stop and recognize God needs to be involved in every decision. And if not, what we find ourselves in is we find ourselves in the same place as these people that Paul's writing about in Romans chapter 1. It says we never bothered to acknowledge. We never bothered to do it. And it's not that we're trying to do anything wrong. It's just that we never stopped long enough to consider him. And so the idea this morning is this, that we want to be grateful. And so if we want to be grateful, how can I be more grateful? Let's start off with talking about some ways that we can guarantee ourselves to be ungrateful. Y'all want to hear some of these? Here's one of the ways that I can guarantee you will be ungrateful. First one is this: keep a list of all the people who have done you wrong and what they did. Write it down. And every time you see them, remind yourself of what they did, just so it gets you angry a little bit more, right? Write it down and make sure that the people that are around you know what those people did to you. I promise you will be ungrateful. Another thing that you can do is that you can stay distracted at work. You can stay distracted on your phone, and you can stay distracted with other people's stuff. And you will always be ungrateful. Because I've talked with way too many people who they have worked their entire life, and they work incredibly well, and they work incredibly long hours, and their work becomes their life. And at the end of the day, they get home and they complain that they have to work so much. And they're ungrateful for the job that they have because it's taking up too much of their time. And they're not getting to vacation enough. They're not getting to spend enough time with their family. They're not getting enough time to do other things. The phone is probably one of the worst and greatest inventions of this century. It gives us incredible knowledge and incredible power at our fingertips. There's more power, I've been told, I don't know this for a fact, but I've been told there's more power in our phone that we carry in our hand than there was in the first shuttle that landed on the moon, the capsule that landed on the moon. We have incredible knowledge at our fingertips. We have incredible games like Candy Crush. Anybody? That's just me. We have incredible things like that, and I can't imagine, I can't tell you how many times I've looked around my own living room, and there's 7 people in the living room, and every one of them's on a phone. How many times I've sat in a staff meeting, and every person in the room is on a phone. And again, nobody's trying to be disrespectful, but it has become so much a part of who we are that it's there constantly, and it becomes a distraction for us. And we stay distracted, and we miss important things. How many of you have ever been traveling on a road trip, and somebody goes, oh, look how gorgeous that is. And by the time you look up from your phone, it's gone. You miss things, and you're ungrateful for it. Your other people's stuff. I mean, do we need to go into this? I mean, how many times have you looked at other people's stuff going, I wish I had that. I can't believe they have that house. If I had that house, here's what I would do with that house. If I had that ability to do that, I would do that. You stay focused on other people's stuff long enough, you will be ungrateful. I promise you. Focus on what God has given you and be thankful for what God has given you. Another one is let your health deteriorate. Now some of you can't help it. Some of us, we had back problems, we have different issues, we have things that have overcome our body that we have no control over. But then there's just, those of us who said, you know what, I stopped playing football when I was in 12th grade. I got married when I was 22. She got the best of me at 22. I'm downhill from here, right? You let your health deteriorate long enough, and at some point, your health is going to be a problem for you. And it's going to be something that you're ungrateful for because you can't do the things that you used to do or the things that you want to do and continue to do. Another thing that you can do in order to guarantee ungratefulness is to constantly speak about only the negative things that have occurred in your life. If you have to wake up every morning at 5:15 and that's all you talk about, that's going to be a problem. If all you talk about are all the people who have done you wrong or the way that you don't have whatever somebody else has or the fact that groceries are too high and you don't like the current president, and you don't like the one that could be elected and all these different things, and you're just talking about all the negative things that could possibly happen in your life, and that's all you ever talk about, I promise you're going to be ungrateful. And the last one I would say is when you pray, you focus only on yourself, and you're probably going to be ungrateful. But there are ways for us to guarantee gratefulness. And it's similar in list, but it's a little bit different. First way that we can guarantee gratefulness, one of those ways is that we keep a list of all the people in our life that point us to God and help us by being our biggest encouragers. I was doing the message for Steve Watkins' funeral yesterday, and the one thing I was able to say as I started off talking about Steve and Gay is this: since I have been at this church, they as a couple have been one of my greatest encouragers in this church. They come up and they hug my neck from time to time. They'll come up and just tell me how thankful that they are that I'm here, and how thankful they are that the church is growing and all the things that it's doing. And they have just been some of my biggest encouragers. And I count them on that list that I kind of keep in my mental state of people who just are encouragers to me. And there's lots of you in this room who are that same way. Most of you in this room. I can't think of anybody in this room right now that I don't want on that list, as a matter of fact. But it's great to have those kind of people in your life. You need to recognize the blessings of each day. It's sometimes hard to do, but first of all, you recognize your existence, the fact that God chose to wake you up this morning. The fact that you have family that you love and that loves you, right? Your friends, your coworkers, your church families. These are all things that we need to be thinking about every day. Your ability to afford things, or your ability to help other people afford things, are blessings that you have that we need to be grateful for. Your spiritual gifts, or your salvation. And those are just to name a few of things that we need to keep a list of. We need to pray prayers of gratitude, recalling everything that God has done for us. And we need to pray for others on all the things that have happened in our life that were hard, not the victories, but the losses. And we need to thank God for bringing us through those things. Because that's sometimes when we see God work the hardest and the greatest in our lives, is when we're having a difficulty in our life and we're having to walk through that with him. And we have to lean on him. We need to exercise your mind and your body so that both can be as sharp as possible. So play a little bit more Candy Crush. It'll help you, but not too much, right? One of my favorite ways that we can guarantee gratefulness is that we can use visual reminders. One of those visual reminders would be pictures. I got a picture frame for Father's Day, and it's an electronic picture frame that sits in my office. And about every 20 seconds, it changes to a different picture. Some of y'all have this at home. It's the favorite thing I've ever gotten in my life. My kids can send from Michigan or from Baton Rouge or wherever they are, they can send me a picture directly to that frame, and I'll look up every once in a while, and there's a new picture of my kids or my family. And it just causes me to be thankful for what God's done. Jewelry that reminds us of a particular individual, somebody that's given us something that's precious to us, that means something to us. When we wear it, we think about them. Is another way for us to remember. A handwritten note that reads Happy Father's Day and means nothing to anybody but you. I've got one that I keep in my office, and it says I love you, just like this. And then it pulls out like this, and it says this much. And it's from my youngest son, Jake. And I can probably tell you that he probably doesn't even remember doing it. But it sits in my office, and every time I look at it, I think of him. We need to use visual reminders in our lives to remind us of the things that God has blessed us with, so that we can be grateful and not skip from one blessing to the next blessing without ever recognizing who he is and glorifying him in the process. And so let me just say this. As the month of November begins, and we'll actually literally finish off with a holiday that's called Thanksgiving, that has become more about food and Black Friday than it has become about actually being thankful for things, right? It's the only holiday where we're thankful for everything that we have on Friday, or on Thursday, and on Friday, nothing is good enough, and we got to go get all the new stuff, right? My question to you is this. Will you take time to recognize God this month? And in doing so, will you take time to glorify him? And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can do those things by what we just talked about. Spiritually, though, you can do that, first of all, just by giving your life to him. If that's something you've never done, you can start there. There is no greater peace than the peace of having Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. None. There's nothing, one of the greatest steps that you can take, and the next step that you should take if you've given your life to Christ, is to be baptized, like this family did this morning. That's a sweet, sweet thing. They spoke more in that baptism in their message than I probably have done here because of their obedience to what they did. It was a sweet thing to watch. Take your next step, whatever that next step is that God's calling you to do. If he's calling you to serve, then serve. If he's calling you to become a member of this church and place your talents and your time and your tithe in this church, then do that. Don't be disobedient by delaying what he's calling you to do. recognize what he's calling you to do, and then glorify him by doing it. And whatever it is that he's calling you to do, because the Bible tells us in 1 Thessalonians, it says, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Amen? Father, we love you. And we thank you this morning that we have the opportunity to be grateful, to recognize who you are, and to understand everything that you are. God, this morning as we get ready to take communion, here's the prayer, is that you would just